Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter in 1978. So, here it is, the 4K collector's edition that's just come out, and it came yesterday, which was actually my birthday. And as traditionally now, I do watch this film on my birthday every year. And yeah, I first saw this film, bit of backstory, when I was about 9, and many people have said over the years that it's boring and all that. And the wedding sequence is boring and it drags. Well, it just shows you that a 9-year-old can watch it, and it became one of my favourite films of all time. I watched it when I was 9. That's when I started watching most films that weren't excessively violent. I wasn't allowed to watch them till I was about 10, 11. Still quite young, but yeah, The Deer Hunter. I was told by my parents is an amazing film. De Niro, I was already following his films. I always loved watching De Niro. He was my favourite actor. He always has been, really. As long as I can remember actually following actors like that, I checked this film out, and I was kept getting told by my mum that it was boring at first, but it does pick up and all that. But I remember just thinking, how is this boring? It just I completely fell in love with it, these characters and everything, and just actually this, I guess, the spectacle of it all. And once they get into Vietnam and all this stuff, it becomes one of the most powerful films ever in the history of cinema. I think this film, it won the 5 Oscars, the big 5 kind of thing almost. And of course, Cimino got Best Director. Then he'd next, make Heaven's Gate, which for me personally is a really bad film. And it's a real shame that his career never picked up after that, because although I really did not like the film, it's I would have loved to see more of his work, and with this film, I think he actually changed my life. I always thought of this very fondly, and as long as I've made lists of films, this has always been right up there with my favourites. I always kept wanting to revisit it. I kept saying, can we watch The Deer Hunter again? And I've seen it probably about 10 times now. And every time it just it's like revisiting an old friend in many ways, or a group of friends, because this is it's an ensemble. It's about basically these characters, Russian Americans, in this kind of town, steel workers, and you've got some of these characters like Axel and John with them, but the main three, played by Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and John Savage, who plays Michael, Nick, and Steve, respectively. And basically, they're the ones that go into Vietnam. And the film is basically movements, very distinct, and it just basically shows the effects of war in really the most shocking and realistic ways that's ever been put to screen. This is even more powerful than Schindler's List for me. And I think war films. Many great war films. Some of them miss a little bit, and they actually don't focus on the characters as much. There's some that get it all right, like Apocalypse Now, and have this fantastical feel as well, and are just mind blowing. Full Metal Jacket, but this one just goes even further. I think it's it's basically the first Vietnam War film that really was big and as we know it. And it's that saying, I can actually say this, the first and still the best, because I think this is even better than Apocalypse Now. I think it's just the finest war film, full stop. And I think that it's just it's probably in my top 10 films of all time. This is the this marks the kind of weeks that I've been doing. Favorite film every day. For my favorite films list. This one is actually now, I will say it. It's the best film I've reviewed on my channel. And my favourite, I think it's even better than The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, actually. It's that good. It's an absolutely mind-blowing film. So, 78, and Days of Heaven came out in that year, and I think this is even better than that. And it just, when I first saw it, it was just, it made me cry and everything like that. Every time since I have, and last night, I didn't technically want to do a review on my birthday, but I would have been fine with it, but it just, I was so actually silenced by the film. That's what it does. It kind of has such an effect, and it makes me kind of just lost for words. Many criticise the ending, but I think it's such a moving ending, beautiful ending. And this is just, it is one of the most beautiful films of all time. The level of humanity in this film is almost unmatched. Basically the film, of course, many have criticised even the people that do love the film, the wedding sequence, fairly early on, from the 20-minute onwards mark. But you feel the kind of build up to the wedding as well, and then it kind of lasts until around about the 50-minute mark, and then they go hunting and all that, which is just stunning. The wedding sequence, many say it's boring, just like some have actually said The Godfather Part 1. The Godfather 1, the wedding's boring, but this one I think is an even better wedding. And is it boring? No, it's well, first of all, the spectacle is wonderful, the way it's shot and everything. Film of Sigmund would work with Cimino. Of course, Close Encounters, Heaven's Gate, which cinematography is one of the best things about that film, and it'd work on Deliverance as well. Absolutely wonderful cinematographer. Cimino, of course, would be very attention to detail on this film, just like Heaven's Gate. He tried to, and it's just I think that the cinematography is just wonderful. The wedding sequence is some of the best character development I've ever seen in my life. So no, it is not boring, and no, it is not pointless, and no, it does not drag on. Cimino makes the most of it. He kind of, yes, it is. It's almost an hour until they actually, away from this whole wedding. But it's so stunning. It's operatic. It introduces you to the characters, and it's a joyous occasion, and he makes the most of that. It's a spectacle, but it never loses focus of these characters and how they're developing. And you see different sides to them because, of course, drinking and all that sort of stuff. And you see the joy of it all, the friendships, and the romance that develops between Meryl Streep's character of Linda, who is absolutely wonderful in this film. Meryl Streep, she gets a bit of hate now, saying people say she's overrated. I don't. I'm not going to say she's an absolutely masterful actress now, but she was back in her time for sure. And this performance is wonderful, and this romance that forms between Linda, it's kind of like a love triangle. Although Nick and Michael never really dispute it, but between Nick, Linda, and Michael, and De Niro really though. De Niro and Meryl Streep, the romance forms between these two, and it's one of my absolute favourite in cinema. A lot of things get in the way, of course, of it. It is a war film, and many things happen, but there's so many moments throughout the film that are just wonderful with this romance. And this film, the wedding sequence, is just stunning. It just visually tells you everything, and these characters, you just observe them. Just all the right placements of the camera. The lighting is wonderful. Just the way that it's all been staged, everything, the whole wedding sequence. It's very, very naturalistic, but it's also very, very. It's like a spectacle. The music, Cimino wanted Russian folk songs, in this film, and the wedding sequence, it has stunning music in it, of course, and of course towards the end of the film he uses the kind of the church music once again, but in very, very different ways. And this is of course very famous for its Russian Roulette scene, and the scenes towards the end, but the wedding sequence is still some of the most memorable and some of my absolute favourite stuff in cinema. It'd still be. It's still at this point one of my absolute favourite films, basically, but it just gets better and better. And then basically when they return home after the war, which is what this film does, of course. The war scenes are very, very short in comparison to the rest of the film, probably about half an hour. And once they return home, that's when he brings it to a level that is something almost unmatched. The elevation, how powerful it is, just the subtle moments, and also the really, really just shocking, brutal moments towards the end. Cimino just was a genius here. Of course, he would co-write it, come up with the story, and co-produce it, and of course direct. And he was an auteur. He really was. Of course, he was of Heaven's Gate, but in the wrong ways for me. And it's a shame that didn't go well for him. But in this film, it's rarely have I seen a director in so much control of his vision, and the amount of heart and passion that's put into this film is on another level. I really think it's one of the most passionate personal films I've ever seen. And the performances as well. It's like everyone, most people are at their best here. Yes, De Niro is at his best. I think it's his greatest performance of all time, and really it could be his best film of all time, even surpassing The Godfather Part 2. I have not fully decided, I never really decide, between them two films, because they're really right next to each other on my list of favourite films, around that top 10 mark, in and around it. They're both some of the absolute finest. I think he gives a better performance in this, and really it's a contender for a better film. I think it could be, I could prefer it. Really have to decide once again, but I think that De Niro in this film is on another level of acting. What he does in this film is something else. The kind of, he's very, very subtle and kind of quite a shy and awkward character at the beginning, but he's one who's really, really warm straight away. And he's really kind of caring and stuff, but also quite he's quite strict with John Cazale's character. In particular, this character that John Cazale plays in his final film role, unfortunately. What a shame. But he kind of he's never organised this character that he plays, and he basically, Michael, Robert De Niro's character, is kind of, he does have a go at him and stuff, but overall he's such a warm character. And in the preparation scenes for the wedding, you see all this character development, wonderfully naturalistic, between Nick and Michael, Christopher Walken and De Niro. And you just learn so much about these characters. The exposition is genius, absolutely genius. The way that Cimino brought out this exposition, it's just so pure, so free flowing, the dialogue, and you sense that these characters have always been there, and that's what a filmmaker should do. Of course, it should never feel like stagey and as if it's just for the film. These characters have always been there, and it feels like, and the friendship and everything between all these characters, and the whole group are stunning, and the warmth, and it's just some of my favourite, one of my favourite ensembles, and just the friendships between all these characters, and how it's affected over time and through this war. It makes this one of my absolute favourite films of all time. And the wedding sequence, I think I've touched on that. It's not boring for me. It's not pointless. God no. And yes, people have criticised the fact that it doesn't move the plot. The only plot in this film is Vietnam War, and these steelworkers go there. Who cares? It's not that approach. It's not something like Inception, where it tells you loads and loads of different things. Inception is great, of course. I'm not, but it's not a film where it has a heavy plot and all that. It's very, very sparse in that sense. But Cimino wanted, I've seen interviews. He always believed that you should build a film through the characters first, and that's what he does. I wouldn't really care about the film as much. If the characters weren't emphasised enough, and it was it's primarily about these characters, because that in this case, why would you want to do it any other way? The characters are the ones that we connect with. We observe, and then we see how they change through the war. Even the people that don't take part in the war are all affected, and that's what Cimino was showing. I wouldn't care for in this film, a mission or something like that they all do, and you see all the squad and everything. No, it's not about that. It's about these characters are friends. They're still workers and everything like that. It portrays all that sort of stuff, working class. But really, it's just about how war can affect people, and it just brings out the humanity in everyone, and how war can affect people psychologically and all that. And it's one of the most powerful films I've ever seen, and I'm glad he focused on the characters. I much prefer character-driven films than plot ones. But this one, it's just some of the absolute greatest characters in cinema. I think the writing is stunning. It's also natural, so meaningful, and very uplifting and joyous. At the beginnings, and it's great that he used the wedding sequence to kind of show this joy, and then it juxtaposes that with the harshness of the war. And we'll get into and of course in between that you've got this deer hunting sequence, which I really cannot put into words how spiritual that is, and just wonderful it is, really. These moments are so pure, And yeah, this really it really is in my top 10. I think this film is so meaningful to me. But then we have the war scenes, and this is the stuff. You can feel this foreshadowing early on. You see this kind of this guy from Vietnam in the actual the church and everything after the wedding, and he kind of foreshadows how meaningless the war was and all that sort of stuff. This is an anti-war film after all. But then when you actually get into the war scenes, it drops you right in there, and really, if you've seen the film, you'll know what I'm on about. But if you've not, this, it feels like it's actually happening, and it is very, very shocking and upsetting stuff. And the Russian roulette scene, of course, I won't spoil what happens there, but it could be the greatest acted scene of all time. That's how good it is. It's a contender. Everyone involved there, John Savage. Wow, Christopher Walken, even better. Of course, he got his Oscar for supporting actor. Completely deserved that. Yeah, definitely. And even better is De Niro. De Niro in this film, in this scene in particular, is off the charts. The way he's able to switch in between different emotions and carry the scene so much. He's kind of looking out for these other guys, and he's the leader really of the film, even though he's kind of at times the shy one. But the way he's trying to look out for these guys, he's also trying, of course, get them out of there as well. And actually, what happens there. When it actually happens, the Russian roulette between these three characters, it's really unsettling stuff. It's some of the best acting in film. It's contender, as I say, for the greatest acted scene of all time. And De Niro, it's his greatest performance for me, and but everyone in that scene, and the way that Cimino kind of directs it, the way some simple cuts, some simple reaction shots and everything, and the way he just balances the three, basically all the characters in that scene, even the background characters, and he never loses sense of anything. The tension that he builds, the emotions that is given, and the kind of climax to this scene is an absolute masterpiece of cinema. It's beyond what most films have ever done, and just some of the most powerful and unsettling stuff you ever see. Really emotional, brings you to tears, and because you care about these characters so much. At least I did, because the build-up is so. He took his time with it. I love epic films. They're really overall my favourites. I seek out long films, and I love directors who take time with building up characters like this. And then when things do happen dramatically like that, it means so much more, and then you're affected by it more. People say it's too long. A film is never too long unless there's scenes that are pointless and don't really go anywhere and advance the kind of narrative, or if a film just kind of you feel like the filmmaker's deliberately trying to extend it. This film isn't, of course. Every minute, every second is perfection for me, and yeah, I just think this scene is so affecting. And then, of course, after that, after a kind of sequence where things happen, everyone's dispersed, everything just goes wrong for them, basically. There is the return to home, and really, this is the greatest stuff. It's even better, and sometimes you rewatch it, and you don't think they could have topped it in terms of a piece of cinema, but really it just gets better and better after that sort of 1 hour 50 mark, when he returns home, and when they all return home, and things, you deal with the aftermath of the war, and you also have many moments where they kind of, especially De Niro's character Michael, he basically wanders through, and it's like you see he speaks to people and everything, and it's like this feeling like, oh, it's not seen you for a while and all that sort of stuff, and it's so affecting. This is the stuff that is constantly emotional, even more so than the rest of the film, just constantly till the very end credit scene, where Michael Cimino shows all the characters wonderfully. It's just got constantly emotional. Such a powerful film, and it's just the subtleties, and then as well you've got a scene very near the end, which is one of the saddest moments in cinema, and one of the greatest for me. I just love epics as well, where you go through this time, or just a different set of events over, you know, a long time, running time, and, you know, you get kind of things you feel at the beginning and everything is all wrapped up at the end, but it kind of when you return to something that's already been in the film, or you know, it's hard to explain, but it's just so wonderful. It's like you've come so far, kind of thing. This journey feel, and that's why one of the reasons why I love epics so much. And this is one of the finest epics. You know, the final act of the film is just something else. This film gets better and better. Really, it's operatic. It's masterfully directed, shot, edited to perfection. The score, you know, Cavatina, you know, originally by John Williams, this kind of guitarist, but it was originally really for piano, I believe, and then Stanley Myers kind of rewrote it for the guitar, and expanded it basically. So as we know it, it's you know, it's the Stanley Myers one. Of course, it was in a film previous to this, but really it's massively famous for this film, and I couldn't think of a better piece of music to be used. From the very opening credits, you know, it makes me very emotional hearing this music. It's just a perfect choice, I feel. And then of course the Frank Valli music as well in the film. You just got so much emotional ties to the pieces of music, but it's used operatically as well. You know, the different sequences. You know, Cimino just directed this film to perfection. It's beyond that, you know. Of course, this would get full marks for you know, from me, but I will talk about it a little bit longer because this is just stunning. You know, the characters, what you feel, what I felt towards the end when they were actually, the way that they're all affected by this war, the Vietnam War, and you know, the way that everything changes really when De Niro in particular comes home, and you know, all these characters, Axel, John, and all these characters, the way they react as well, is something else. It's so moving, just from the little gestures. And of course there is some really uplifting moments as well when they return, but it really just deals so well with how war can affect people's lives, and you know, just it's an absolute magnum opus of cinema, really. As I said, the music is just stunning. It's just beautiful, and you know, just overall the spiritual feel that this film has, you know, and it's very hard to describe what what I mean by spiritual. It's kind of subjective, you know, but I think it comes to the way a filmmaker, or you know, people involved, can elevate you to a level where you kind of touches your soul, and this is the sort of film that this is. It deals with, and through these, you know, you start off with this groundedness, and these normal events, you know, wedding and stuff, through this, and then going and just climbing higher and higher. It just elevates to a level that's almost unmatched, and it kind of just you feel it in your soul, kind of thing, for me anyway. It's one of them films, like City Lights or something like that, which it just elevates to a level where you just couldn't think you would ever be elevated by films that have already, you know, elevated you high and moved you to a level. But this film really is one of the films that is very much beyond what I've ever seen. It's one of them, that small bracket, maybe my top 16 or so, where, you know, it just kind of, even though they're still within the same tier of my, you know, the rest of the 100% plus tier S's, they are really beyond them even further. And just the way that this film, the scenes, especially in the mountains as well, you know, the way it captures nature, and the way that he uses music and cinematography just to elevate, and the way that this is just kind of an escape from these guys, from all the harshness and everything. But then eventually, you know, even then, you know, the way the effects of war, they have a long-lasting effect on all these characters, and it's never quite the same, and that's just so powerful. It's kind of like, really, there could be children in this film and growing up, but this is how the effect that war has had on them, really, even though they're still adults. And it's got this nostalgic feel. You look back to the beginnings of the film, and then, you know, everything's never quite the same, but there's moments where it kind of brings back that joy at times, and that feeling from the first half of the film. but it's just this is something that, in that sense, I connect with so much, and it's a war film. It has, it's not heavy on plot, but who cares? It focuses on these characters masterfully. They're so well written. Some of the greatest performances in cinema, especially De Niro, contender for the absolute greatest for me. There's maybe one or two that I think that could be a single greatest performance than this, but this could be the best. It's that good. It really is. The warmth to this film, the passion, the heart, but the brutality of it, but the way he sincerely brings it all together. Many messages, but really just how war can affect humans. The humanity in this film is almost unmatched. It's the greatest war film of all time for me. Almost the greatest film of the 70s, very nearly. There's two films that I think are definitely better than this from the 70s, and then The Godfather Part 2 and this are very close indeed, in terms of quality for sure. But that number one of the 70s is way beyond this. I will be reviewing that. I don't know when I'll be reviewing that, but I can't really hint. I don't want to hint, but yes, The Deer Hunter. Overall, of course, it gets a full marks from me. One of the most moving, beautiful, at times uplifting, other times shattering films I've ever seen. It's just easily one of the top 10 most emotional films I've ever seen. It means so much to me, and I'm glad I watched it when I was young, and I was able to, kind of grow up and watch it every couple of years at least, really. And the longest time I've gone without seeing it's probably 2 years, 3 years actually. But yeah, no, I've seen it about 10 times now, and it just gets better and better, or just it always just I come back to it, and it's like revisiting old friends, going through this emotional journey. And yes, of course, it gets my 100% plus tier S rating, my absolute highest, my bonus tier, reserved for the absolute finest magnum opuses. But really, if I had another rating system even further than that, this would be in it. That kind of top 16, which is a bit more of a significant jump once again. But yes, no, I feel that this is one of the most spiritual films, as I've said, moving films, human films, and Cimino here, it's very hard to see how he went on to Heaven's Gate, but it's also a shame, because this film, and I haven't seen Thunderbolt in life, but this film, it trumps what most directors have ever achieved. Any Scorsese's, as masterful as he is, and how much I love Scorsese, it's better than any films he's made. It's better than any Tarantino's. It's better than, for me, any Sergio Leone's. The list could go on. It maybe not better than all Kubrick films or all Spielberg films, but yes, it's really just it's almost, for me, basically the single greatest film in cinema, and probably the third best film, my third favourite film of the 70s. And yes, The Deer Hunter. If you've not seen this film, watch it. It will hopefully change your life. It did mine. And this set as well is great, and the 4K was really wonderful. And the best way to watch the film, of course, is in 4K. So yeah, thanks for watching my review of The Deer Hunter. And maybe I'll do some analysis scenes at some point, because this is one of my absolute most loved films. And yeah, it was very hard for me to talk about it. I would not have been able to do a review last night, because it just has an effect on me, and one of them films like Days of Heaven, where you just think about it for months on end, and basically in between watches, you're at some point every 2 days at least, I'm thinking about it, or listening to the soundtrack, or just getting a feel from my experience. So yeah, an absolute magnum opus, quite close to the greatest film of all time. And spoilers, there's another film I'll be reviewing this week that's even better than this, and even more spiritual. I look forward to doing that, and you'll see it when it comes up and upload. And yeah, but this film, The Deer Hunter, one of the absolute finest in cinema. Thanks for watching my review of Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter.